no one is going to tackle these things because nobody wants to pay for it, and we're gonna be faced with a number of hard choices that are going to involve both spending cuts and tax increases. There's just no way around it.
What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Godell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Welcome to episode 11. Todd, they keep letting us come back and talk about politics, and I'm especially excited about this show.
Today's show is, I've been thinking about it all week. We have a great guest, and there's so much of that we're going to talk about. I think it affects everyone out there. So this is going to be a great opportunity for us.
Yeah, we get to talk about economics, and I think, everyone in the political science department at Texas A&M, I think, absolutely loves the intersection of politics and economics. I think, the political economy focus of our department is very strong, and so we love to make these connections. Real quick introduction of our guest. Jonathan Meir is the let me get this right, the Mary, Julia, and George R. Jordan Professor of Public Policy in the Department of Economics. You're a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. And then your specialization, you specialize on individual decision making, right, in microeconomics, but you also do a lot on charitable giving. And a lot on the politics of education, not higher education.
That's right. I get bored easily, and I like asking questions that I find interesting.
Yeah. Well, today we're hoping you can help us help shed some light on what's going on in terms of the economy and in terms of the economic policies that the candidates are offering. And so maybe the first question to you is just. What is going on with the economy? I feel like we've moved to a place where once upon a time we knew whether the economy was getting better or worse, and that increasingly it's the subject of political debate in terms of whether it's getting better or worse. Am I wrong? Has that always been the case, or have the signals become more mixed?
Well, I'll leave the politics to the experts. I can give you just sort of a brief rundown. So inflation, which is a huge concern, is a very real concern, has ameliorated somewhat, though in many cases what people feel is maybe a bit different than what they see in headlines, which I think is one of the things that maybe leads to some of that disconnect and discontent that leads people to respond more to the politics of the issue. It doesn't no good to repeat, well, the headline number is now 2.9% instead of 4.5%, and expect people to feel better about that when the things that they spend their money on most frequently may be more volatile. And the things that people notice, the things that are most salient to people, are usually things like food and gas prices, which tend to be a lot more volatile than many of the other things that they spend money on. And so, that I think is maybe where some of this disconnection comes from.
I've maintained for a long time that the one thing that everybody looks at is interest rates, and their connection with the larger economy, because that kind of tells them they can't buy or sell a house, or there's a lot of things going on. My credit cards are going up, anything, and so I think it is kind of like you said, food and gas, but I think interest rates seems to be a problem out there.
Absolutely, and I think that that's something that again is very salient to people because they write a mortgage check, every month, or they're thinking about buying a house or selling a house, and maybe having more trouble doing that. We got used to shockingly low interest rates, and I think you think back to very much within living memory, a 7% interest rate was a great interest rate on a house. And if you go back, 40 years, 15% might have been a not terrible interest rate on a house. But when things go from 2 or 3% up to 7 very quickly, it's quite disconcerting for people.
From a political side, we see the Trump campaign talking about things are terrible, the inflation is running wild, and then you hear kind of the Biden-Harris group saying, inflation's down, it's going the right direction, the economy's good, and we see politically both sides doing what we expect them to do. And so that's why we wanted to ask you, from an economic standpoint, what's the reality?
And are they both wrong or are they both right? It seems like
Well, one really important thing to note is that inflation being down doesn't mean prices go down. It means they're just not going up as fast as they were before. And so the expectation that, the nominal prices, like the sticker price of something, is going to start falling is not accurate, and I think both campaigns kind of point to this in sort of the wrong way. I also think, the economy is very local. Not just locally geographically, but local to individuals. And there's a ton of churn in the job market. Millions of people change jobs every year, lose jobs, gain jobs, et cetera. And so if your individual circumstances are feeling precarious or difficult, you're having trouble making a new mortgage payment, gas prices are high, and you've got a long commute, the economy feels bad to you, and all the headlines in the world about rising stock market or increasing real wages, even that is to say purchasing power, is not going to make you feel better about your personal circumstances.
Yeah, politically, it seems to be a real challenge for a campaign, and I think Biden was experiencing this first, and now Kamala Harris is experiencing this. As it's a challenge to come in and tell someone, the economy's good. What's wrong with you?
Yeah,
right?
I don't know that people love being told that.
Yeah, I know you think you're struggling, but look at these macroeconomic indicators. They're doing better, and especially on the price issue, it seems like that's one of the real challenges, because as you said, prices once they go up, they tend to stay up, and then the question is how quickly are they continuing to go up? And even though we can say that inflation seems like it's coming under control, what does that mean for the average voter or the average citizen, or maybe not even the average, because we don't have to go to averages, right?
And wages are going up. Purchasing power is higher, and it's actually been increasing faster for lower income people than it has even for higher income people. But again, the paycheck is what you deserve, and the grocery store is who's gouging you, which is something I'm sure we'll touch on in a few minutes. And so the idea that your paycheck went up by 5% and prices went up by 3% means that you have 2% more purchasing power. That doesn't really resonate with people, even if in reality they can buy more stuff and they're better off.
We have about 2 months left in the campaign, and so I was thinking through this. How much are we going to see much change in the economy right now? I mean, the economy that we have today, in 2 months, do you expect any changes that we can really experience?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be here, because I'd be on my super yacht, having made billions of dollars, being able to predict what's going to happen. It's hard to know. The economy reacts to a lot of shocks. We've got a lot of turmoil in different places in the world, and so prediction is sort of a fool's errand. Even if we do know that the Federal Reserve seems to be indicating that they're going to lower interest rates somewhat in their next meeting, which will make some borrowing costs a bit cheaper, might spur consumption a little bit, and so that may goose the economy a little. But now that we know that it's very likely to happen, that Fed Chairman Jay Powell has sort of said he would, then if you believe in efficient markets and efficient prices, it's already priced in to our predictions.
Yeah. So, so that's a signal, right? And so in some ways that gets back to the problem of how people are living the economy versus what the news is reporting about the economy. But the signal is that inflation seems to be under control well enough that we can lower interest rates. We probably won't, and I'm posing this as a suggestion and getting your reaction to it. We probably won't feel the effects of that interest rate reduction before the election, or will we?
To be honest, this is a little outside of my wheelhouse, so
Okay.
I don't want to prognosticate on it. These things do take a little bit of time to kick in. People don't suddenly go out and buy a house because the interest rate has fallen by 0.25% or even 0.5%. But over time, you do see businesses finding it a little bit easier to borrow, to expand or start a new business. People being able to move a little bit more easily because they're able to afford a mortgage in a new place where maybe there's a job that fits them a little bit better.
From a political standpoint, if you look at job approval for President Biden on the economy, it's very low. In fact, like -20 right now, approval versus disapproval. And so my guess is if the Federal Reserve reduces the interest rate a little bit, or and that all of a sudden Biden will get credit for that, even in the short run. But I don't know what you guys think about that. It just seems like people are look for signals, even though they'll say, well, it's going to get better now, and we're going to give President Biden. And I think something that we'll have to talk about at one point, does Kamala Harris as the vice president get credit for that also?
Well, I think presidents, administrations get too much credit and too much blame for the way the economy is going. And certainly, there are things that they can do and that they do that affect the general course of the economy. But, the American economy is 330 million people and our trading partners around the world making their individual decisions subject to, the constraints that they face, including government policies, and those policies do have impacts. But at the end of the day, the economy is just so much more than the government.
Well, and one of the fascinating things I think about Kamala Harris becoming the nominee and Biden dropping out is she has been able to run largely as a challenger rather than as the incumbent. I think this is driving the Trump administration crazy. They're like, she should be saddled with everything that Biden was saddled with. But she seems new, and she's exciting, and she's younger, and so she gets this opportunity to be both part of an administration and claim credit for the success, but also hasn't been saddled with any of the concerns that they had with, or seems to be, that doesn't seem saddled with the economy and the concerns that people were placing on Biden. She's in an interesting political position.
Yeah, it seems to me that that's really a problem with the Trump campaign, their inability to really drive the narrative that's going on out there. And so, yeah, and I think that good for her side to be able to say, look, we're not responsible for any of this, and these are our new ideas that people can react to.
I've been impressed by it. It's just fascinating to see the incumbent vice president saying things like, on day one we're going to fix this. I'm like, well, aren't you in charge now? Like, why are you going to make us wait? Couldn't you fix it now?
Exactly, and that's where it's interesting as we talk about the economy here, but the campaign aspects that to me are interesting. Their inability to to stay with a message, to really make people blame the Biden and Harris administration for what they see or dislike right now.
Well, and one of the things I think politically that was sort of fascinating coming into this election cycle is you end up with two old candidates and two, former president versus a president, and it felt like voters wanted change. And just that it was the dynamic seemed to be pushing for sort of a change election, and they were going to get a limited amount of change. And now Harris has been able to tap into that, both in economics and in more generally in terms of policy, I think. So.
No, I think that's very apt. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, how she's been able to, navigate the fact that as a vice president, she's not been responsible for the policy is interesting. Yeah.
Well, since we have Jonathan here today as an economics expert, I'd really like to talk about some of the different proposals from the candidates and kind of get your reaction to them and how are they good ideas, bad ideas, or neutral, and that type of thing.
Well, I think the thing that I've noticed is that it appears that the last bastion of bipartisanship in American politics is terrible economic ideas. We're getting just atrocious economic ideas from both sides. I don't know if that's cause for celebration, that we've still got some common ground. And then as someone who teaches principles of microeconomics to over 3,000 students a year, I am just have a factory for the production of new questions and stuff for my students to look at that will feel very salient to them. So I don't know where you guys want to start. We could start anywhere.
Well, I want to pick up on that comment, just the bad ideas, the bad economic ideas, because it does seem to me like we went from the Democratic Party had become more business friendly over time, and then Trump became clearly a populist candidate. But it seems now like the Democratic Party has said, oh yeah, we're going to borrow some of that populism. Is it all about appealing to working class voters and the politics of trying to appeal to specific groups with what feels like giveaways that aren't very good economic ideas? Do you think is politics ruining economics? I guess.
Well, I feel like you guys always ruin my side of things. No, in all seriousness, I want to. It's certainly how it seems to me. I want to defer to the two of you in terms of that. But these are all topics that I cover in my principles class. And so these are really basic things, not just the economic policies, but also the political economy of this notion of public choice, where you've got concentrated benefits. That is, you call them giveaways, call them whatever you want to. And then the costs are diffused across, hundreds of millions of people. And so, one of the classic examples that we economists always use is that sugar quotas cost the average American maybe $15 to $20 a year. No one's going to march on Washington over that. But you've got, 2 or 3 American companies that make sugar. They're in Florida and Hawaii, and they benefit, $20 times 300 million people. That's a lot of benefit to those individuals. And so concentrated benefits, diffuse costs leads to these kinds of politics.
The interesting you talk about, does politics run economics? There's a lot of talk today about the national debt, the deficit, and I was reading about some of the economic proposals of the two campaigns, and then they both lead to extraordinary new debt and new deficits. But it doesn't seem like that's a message that seems to galvanize the public at all. They're not talking about it. They're talking about the individual proposals, but we don't talk about it in aggregate. That look, maybe this isn't the best thing for our future economy.
Well, that's future America's problem. This is the scary thing, is that these are all very knowable issues, and especially when you talk about entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, they're very predictable. We know exactly when we're going to run out of money for these programs. We've known it for decades, but nobody wants to deal with that. And when I started learning about these things, late 90s, early 2000s, dates like 2032 sounded like really, really far away. I was like, I'll be in my 50s. I don't care about that. But this is around the corner, and no one is going to tackle these things because nobody wants to pay for it. And we're gonna be faced with a number of hard choices that are going to involve both spending cuts and tax increases. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, but to the question about inflation and the concern about inflation and prices, can we? This isn't a great question. So, can we really do something about inflation if we don't do something about the debt? Isn't the debt contributing to inflation? Don't we have to worry about the debt because of its ultimate consequence in terms of inflation and cost and prices?
Yeah, these problems are all connected to each other. They're all connected to each other, and we need to get our fiscal house in order. People don't loan you money if they don't think you're going to pay it back. They expect to be compensated more for the risk that they're taking on if they don't think you're going to pay them back, or if you're a sovereign, a government, and you plan on maybe inflating your way out of that debt, then people really don't loan you money, or at least they charge you very high interest rates. That starts to crowd out other spending. At this point, I think we're facing a situation where very shortly we'll be spending more on servicing the national debt than we do on defense. Right. That should really scare everybody, and yet both parties are talking about spending more money because that's what's popular. Either spending more money or combinations of cutting taxes, or don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the guy behind the tree, right. type of approaches to. That are just not serious. They're not serious approaches to taking care of the very real problems that we're facing.
Yeah, and politically, it seems like when the debt does come up, it's usually a less real concern about the debt. This is a cynical take on it, and more, I don't like what you want to spend money on. I want to spend money on the things that I care about. But it seems like in this particular election cycle, they're not even pretending.
No.
Right? They're not even saying we're going to worry about the debt, or you should worry about the debt because they're spending too much money. They're just flat out saying, oh, well, we're not going to talk about that.
I think parties only care about the national debt when they're not in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
That's exactly. Should we take a break?
Sure. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more about the policy proposals.
All right.
Craving adventure? PBS Passport is your ticket to the hottest destinations and drama. Check into luxurious hotels. Hit exclusive beaches. But fair warning, Travel plans can sometimes get complicated. If you've got the itch for drama, travel the world and stream now with PBS Passport on the PBS app.
Did you know KAMU-FM offers 11 original shows? Explore them now. Introducing our local shows, series, and podcast webpage where you can find all 11 shows in one place. Explore shows about gardening, art, public affairs, politics, short storytelling, music, and more. Listen to the latest episodes on our website or your favorite podcast platform with a few simple clicks. Visit tx.ag/KAMUFM shows and listen today.
So welcome back, continuing our conversation about economics and about economics policy and specifically whether politics leads to bad economics. Of all the proposals out there, are there any that really strike you as especially dumb, bad economics? Do we want to talk about tariffs or the no taxes on tips? What's the thing that is an especially good example in your classes?
Well, this is a target-rich environment, and all of it is just great grist for my students for this semester to discuss. We can start with tariffs. Tariffs are taxes. They are taxes on domestic consumers, American consumers. They work, air quotes, work by raising prices. They have to. That's the only way that they can help, again in air quotes, American manufacturing, is by making it more expensive to import products from other countries. So this is just the way that they work. And so who pays those higher prices? Well, American consumers pay those higher prices. And so there's no way of looking at this other than a transfer from American consumers through the higher prices they pay to American manufacturers. Now, that is an argument that one can make. There's a national security argument to be made for certain things. I'm going to stay out of that because it's not my area of expertise. Yeah. But in terms of washing machines, steel, cars, solar panels, etc., this raises prices for Americans. It takes money out of Americans' pockets. It puts some of that money into the government's pocket, and it puts some of that money into the pockets of American manufacturers.
Yeah, but I think when people hear it, right, sometimes they're hearing that this is going to punish the low-cost goods coming in from other countries, and so it's going to create jobs in the United States, and it's going to help the manufacturing. Is there any truth to that part of the argument? I don't really believe this necessarily. I'm trying to play the devil's advocate a little bit.
In the most simplistic sense, it may create jobs in the United States, but American consumers are paying for those jobs. Yeah. And they're going to pay for those jobs with more money than the jobs themselves are paying. That's just the way the math works out. But also, supply chains are complicated. So, for example, when you put a tariff on steel, something that's actually not manufactured that much in the United States anymore. It's not a particularly high-value product, but the things that one uses steel for, things that are more complicated, MRI machines, airplanes, cars, etc., a lot of those things are manufactured in the United States, and now that input price has gone up. And so in the end, careful economic analysis of the initial steel tariffs that were put into place by the Trump administration, that were kept in place and in some cases expanded by the Biden administration, right, again, bipartisan, it actually led to more job losses in downstream industries and greater costs to American consumers through more expensive vehicles, more expensive dishwashers, washing machines, etc., than they saved in the steel industry. At the end of the day, this kind of interference in the market creates losses. Most of those losses are borne by American consumers.
It's really interesting how proposals like tariffs, it's a symbolic gesture and it's meant for a particular purpose, but the substance of it is harmful. It's harmful to the American citizen. When it comes to as prices going up, access to products and that type of thing. So it seems like we get these proposals all the time, but especially during election years.
We do, and especially when the benefits are concentrated in areas that may be in swing states. So, steel is big in Pennsylvania. You get this a lot with agricultural subsidies, especially in Iowa. So it is just demonstrably true that the ethanol mandates in gasoline, which again are a bipartisan favorite, owes a lot, I think, to the fact that Iowa is one of the first states to vote in the presidential primaries for both parties. that is costly to American consumers. It's bad for food prices, both domestically and globally. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for our cars. Why is it popular? Because it puts money in the pockets of Midwestern farmers, who are all lovely people. I'm not sure why they're entitled to our money, but that's where we are, and that's the politics side that I leave to you guys.
Let's talk about price gouging and price caps. Good idea, bad idea?
Oh, just terrible idea. So prices are useful. Prices reflect the supply and demand of a product. We don't like paying a lot for stuff. I love it when people give me stuff for free. It's wonderful. But that is a reflection of the realities of how much people want things. It's a signal to people that says, hey, maybe you should reconsider how much of this you want to purchase. It's a signal to companies that say, hey, you should have more of this stuff in stock, or you should make more of this stuff. And the idea that the government has the knowledge to dictate what egg prices should be in College Station, Texas, and in Des Moines, Iowa, and in Chicago, Illinois, is just madness. I mean, we've seen this movie before. We've seen central planning before. It never ends well.
Yeah, but now some people will argue that one of the reasons you need it is because, at least in some industries and in some markets, there's not adequate competition.
And that's a great point. And antitrust enforcement is important. And that's, again, something we discuss in my class about the effects of market power and the degree to which that can hurt consumers. But that's a very different thing than to say that prices are high because, there's only one grocery store chain in the country is one thing. To say that prices are, that prices are high because H-E-B is charging too much for eggs is this idea of centralized planning that has never worked, will never work, and it just scratches this political itch of people being mad because people don't like high prices, and I don't blame them. I don't like high prices either.
There's also the feeling, I think, or at least some of the push for this politically is the feeling that during crisis, sometimes corporations take advantage of the crisis in order to raise prices at outrageous levels, and people will use snowstorms and snow shovels as the example. But if the supply of snow shovels is limited, the price should go up, right?
Right. So this is absolutely true, and this is something we talk about a lot in my class. And again, this is something people really don't like. But what happens if your local hardware store starts charging $100 for shovels? Well, some enterprising person may take their pickup and drive an hour out of the way and go buy them up at the store that's still selling them for $20 because it's bright sunshine over there, and bring them back and sell them for $50. And that's a signal to people, hey, this is an area that needs generators, ice, snow shovels, whatever it is. The other interesting part of this is that large stores in particular don't raise their price. They don't, because they have reputational considerations. The world is more complicated than our simple models, as I always tell my students. And one of those things is that Walmart really cares about you coming back to Walmart. And if you get mad at Walmart because they've raised the price of their snow shovels to $100, you may not shop there in the future. And they're actually going to lose more money than they make by gouging you on the snow shovels. But what that means is, if I walk in, I'm like, I got a snow shovel, but what if it breaks? I don't know why we're talking about snow in Texas, but it's about 700 degrees outside. But I may say to myself, well, look, this snow shovel is just $10. I could have two. Mm-hmm. If the snow shovel price goes up to $30, $40, $50, I'm like, oh, well, I've got my snow shovel at home. I don't need this one. It's a signal to me that maybe I don't value this quite as much, and it's a signal to the store, hey, you need more snow shovels, or to some guy with a truck, hey, you could make a lot of money by driving somewhere else, picking up. Let's go with bags of ice. Picking up bags of ice and bringing them back here and selling them for a profit.
Mm-hmm. During election years, candidates always use taxes as an incentive to get votes. The Trump campaign has talked about eliminating taxes on Social Security. Good idea or bad idea? Well,
Social Security is in so much trouble right now. The tax on Social Security, and I may be getting some of the details wrong here, I believe was introduced as part of the 1983 reform that extended the life of Social Security. Social Security was in real trouble. It would have ended in terms of being a viable self-funding program some decades ago. Part of that was tax on higher income people who were receiving Social Security benefits. So it is essentially, you can call it a backdoor benefits cut for high-income people. This is more a philosophical question. It's strange to me that my students and me, and well, be nice and say you guys, should pay more in taxes so that a high net worth, a wealthy older person can get a larger check from the government. It's just a very strange policy to me. I'm not averse to reducing or slowing the growth rate of benefits for high income Social Security recipients. And cutting the tax on Social Security benefits is the opposite of that. Social Security is enough trouble. Let's not make it worse.
What about tax on tips?
So that is, again, a bipartisan proposal. and again, my understanding is that this has to do with getting support from Nevada unions, has to do with Nevada being a battleground state, another great example of concentrated benefits, diffuse costs. Treating different people differently through the tax code is rarely a good idea. This one is a great example of being able to say, look, well, maybe instead of paying tuition, my students should tip me. I'll put a tip jar out at the end of lecture, and then I won't have to pay a tax on that. It's very strange to say that the target cashier is worthy of paying higher taxes than the TGIF wait staff. It's just a very strange thing to say. These are some people who are, or even within the same store, the dishwasher is working really hard also, deserves to pay more in taxes, because we can always reframe this, not as a tax cut, but as effectively as a tax increase on the non-tipped workers. It's a very strange policy. It's sort of nakedly political, and again will lead to things, I think, will lead to a lot of whack-a-mole by the IRS trying to define what constitutes a tip profession. It's you know what? It's weird. It's weird from both sides to propose this one particular policy.
Well, it struck me as weird initially, and then even weirder when the Harris campaign jumped on it and said, "Me too."
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What about the child tax credit? It seems a lot of these proposals seem to have to do with the tax code. Both campaigns have proposed a child tax credit. One is bigger than the other.
So the child tax credit is better policy than a lot of these other things. Now, let me point out a couple of things. The U.S. does a lot more of its social spending through the tax code than most developed countries do. And this actually leads to really misleading comparisons in terms of the amount of social support spending that the U.S. government does when comparing spending in the U.S. versus spending in other countries, because most of our spending is essentially the IRS sends you money instead of the Department of Health and Human Services sending you money, and that doesn't necessarily look like spending. So most of our support for low-income families in particular is actually done through the tax code. So having children is expensive, and subsidizing that can be a good thing. I think people overstate the degree to which that's going to affect fertility. Many countries have tried to use these kinds of policies to increase fertility. It doesn't really seem to work, mostly because kids are really hard work, and an extra $5,000 is really not going to make that difference. That said, the child tax credit, I think, is much more positive policy, in large part because kids are expensive, and for lower income families, I think it's really important to help provide some of those transfers to help low income families provide for their kids, whether that's childcare, food, etc.
And so one of the things that in a different policy area is in terms of housing, the proposal that we need more housing units. Can government enter the economy this way and help to subsidize construction costs? Is this good economics? And then once they've subsidized construction, is it good economics to give first-time home buyers money so that they can afford a home?
So the problem with government interference in the housing market is that it's doing way too much of it, and the solution is not to do more. So this is sort of the classic government approach of doing things, which is to restrict supply through regulation, make it hard to build houses through land use regulation, most of which is local. And I'm going to very briefly plug my friend Brian Kaplan, as a George Mason professor, his new book Build Baby Build, which talks about deregulation of housing and how much downstream impact that would have on so many of the things that we worry about, frankly, including fertility. It would make it easier for people to have kids if housing prices fell. But so restricting supply and then giving people more money to buy houses, all that's going to do is raise prices. Now, that's great if you're a current homeowner. You get to sell your house for more. But if you're one of the people receiving this subsidy, most of that subsidy is going into the homeowner's pocket. What I'd like to see is fewer housing regulations, make it easier to build houses, make it easier to build high-density housing. And I think that would solve a lot of our problems. It would lower costs without the government having to spend a lot. If the government subsidizes both supply and demand, you will probably get more housing units, but you will not get lower prices.
Well, we've been talking a lot about bad economic ideas. Are there, and maybe the child tax credit fits into this. Are there good economic policy ideas out there that are floating around, things that look like they are both sound economics and good politics?
From these campaigns, I'm not seeing a lot of this. The one policy that I really actually was an example of bipartisan in a previous era bipartisanship. I have a paper with one of my former PhD students on this, which is expanding the earned income tax credit for people without children. So the earned income tax credit is just to give it is a wage subsidy. If you're a low income wage earner, that is, you have a job, the government will send you money on your taxes to help subsidize your wages. And it does so in a highly progressive manner. This is actually the largest anti-poverty program in the country. And it is larger for people with more kids. And it's effectively almost nothing for people without children. I would like to see that greatly expanded for childless adults to help subsidize people who are just entering the labor force. I think that's a reasonable use of money. I'd also like to see it delivered better. I think it's really strange. We do all this social spending through the tax code, and we send people, in many cases, a check for a third of their annual income in one fell swoop, in one giant $7,000 or $8,000 check. And that is a very strange way to send money to people. We have the capacity, we did this during the pandemic, we have the capacity to send people monthly checks instead of one annual check. So, and this had support from Speaker Paul Ryan, and from President Obama. Both of them came out with proposals that were nearly identical for expanding the childless EITC. But because, my cynical view, there were no political points to be scored on it, it went nowhere.
So we're all academics here, and we give grades every semester. So I've got a tough question for you. If our goal is economic growth, maybe economic stability over the long haul, or continued growth, how would you grade the proposals from each candidate? From A, B, C, D, or
can we give a 0 for both sides? I mean, I think these both sides essentially have F proposals. I think they are both looking to score political points. These are not serious proposals in the sense that they would have positive effects on the American economy overall, whether it's from the Harris administration with price controls, wealth taxes, and eliminating the tax for some subset of workers, or from the Trump administration with reducing taxes for high-income old people, increasing tariffs, which are taxes on American consumers, and the litany of other policies. So I think both campaigns are playing politics, which I guess is their job. But unfortunately, that seems to lead to really bad economic proposals.
Let me ask a somewhat unfair question. Do you see, sort of where you're sitting, any way that we could transform our politics to get better economics? Because part of this, I mean, I do think a lot of concern is the catering, especially to what we've defined as working class, though that means lots of different things, and sort of these populist appeals that are designed in order to attract the votes of particular segments of the electorate. Is there a way to think about our politics differently that would hopefully incentivize candidates to be better economists?
So I think that proposals to reform the way that elections are held, that reward politicians for playing to the center, I think would reduce some of these things now, whether that's things like ranked choice voting or reducing the impact of primaries or changing the way that districts are set in order to make them more competitive. Again, this is not my field of expertise at all, but it seems to me that things that push politicians to think about, rather than capturing 10,000 votes in this one district in Nevada, and more about what would really appeal to working class people in a meaningful way that would actually make their lives better, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Well, we would just say, first of all, thank you for being with us today. And since you are teaching 3,000 students a year and the principles of economics, we're asking you to train them up so that they can be better voters in the future.
Oh, it's my favorite part of teaching that class.
Yeah. So that I think I used to hear people say that economic education was the area that people are the poorest at, and then we don't know how to evaluate economic proposals. And I think it certainly see it in our current campaign. It's at such a level that the average voter just doesn't even know how to evaluate anymore.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something that we need to change.
Yeah, and just so you know that you're having impact, I have had several occasions now in my class when I'm teaching this 233 class, which is about 250 students, not nearly as big as your intro economics course, where students have said, you need to talk to Jonathan Meir. He was talking about this the other day, and he said something completely different than what you're saying, or he said something very similar. I've gotten both of those, but the fact that the students are definitely being influenced by your teaching, and they're bringing it into their other courses, and I think that's fantastic.
That's great to hear. I just try to give them the logical toolkit so that they can think about these problems, and we go over it. They're allowed to choose whatever policies they want. They just need to be able to think through what those policies actually mean.
Yeah, and it's one of the great things about being at a university is seeing people be exposed to different ideas in different places. Well, that's it for episode 11 of Inside Political Science. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/Inside Political Science. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolisci@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.